those eardrums, right?
Hey Maggie, you still there? How's the exposure look if I'm like in on? Okay, it's not too hot. Not too hot.
This is a real deal.
That's right. It's usually red. Right?
I think all Radio Row is you stick a microphone in.
What do you think, man? I just called. Did you get a great message? Who's that? Ralph. That's what they all say. And it is Ralph.
It is Ralph, so his minutes can be...
Told me I'll never work in this town again. The late Ralph Howard. How great thou art. Yeah, I mean, they want us to end at 4:00. You know, I could get started and he could walk on later. Where's our handlers? I'm just gonna have to keep time myself.
I think they propose that we want to start.
Yeah, I'll give it 1 minute for Ralph, and then I want you to tee up the video.
For 6 minutes, maybe comes 10 minutes.
Yeah, no, that's right. That means you can.
That's how we got plenty to talk about.
I'll get the blame, but I'm gonna blame it. That's just how I am. Okay, I think we ought to go ahead and get the show on the road. I'm Mark Rotterman. We have a brief video, and then I'll introduce the panel.
Some have said that Donald Trump's first year in office has been the most conservative since President Ronald Reagan.
And I think, you know, when you put a couple of issues aside, Trump is the most conservative president since Ronald Reagan. I don't think there's any
It's hard laugh for former President Reagan, economic advisor, that Trump's first year was much, much, much better than Reagan's first year, or Kennedy's first year, or Clinton's first year.
But is that true? If we're going to grade the administration, we have to first begin with an understanding of what conservatism is. It's about principles.
We believe deeply in the universal principles of constitutionally limited government, free markets, human dignity, and equality under the law.
It's about individuals.
Conservatism is the political philosophy that sovereignty resides in the person.
And most of all, it's about liberty.
And what could be better than liberty? That is what we're about. We're not telling people what to do, how to act, how to live. This is about liberty.
Let us pledge to each other, with this great lady looking on, that we can, and so help us God, we will make America great again. Thank you very much.
Trump administration give a report card. Again, I'm Mark Rotterman. Joining the conversation is Lauren Ashburn, managing editor and anchor EWTNN News Nightly, Van Hip of American Defense International and author of The New Terrorism, John Malcolm, director of the Reese Center at the the Heritage Foundation, Grover Norquist of Americans for Tax Reform, and Ralph Howell with the Washington Times. Let's begin with President Trump's impact on social and cultural issues. Lauren?
Hi, I'm Lauren Ashburn. I'm the managing editor and anchor of an evening news program called EWTN News Nightly. It's on a network founded by Mother Angelica, a nun. She founded it in her garage more than 35 years ago.
Okay, I'm working.
I want to talk about faith in the media and the lack of faith-based coverage that we see in the media. At EWTN, my show is about news from a Catholic perspective. We're journalists, we cover the news as it happens, but we focus on issues that are important to Christians, important to Catholics. We have a correspondent at the Vatican, and we have correspondents at the White House and Capitol Hill, the State Department, the Pentagon, and we want to make sure that there are voices that wouldn't be heard on mainstream media. You would hear them on our newscast. Donald Trump has no shortage of news. He makes news every single hour, it seems, with his tweets and his appearances, all of his meetings. He's the most covered man in the world. Yet, he single-handedly has been able to bring the spotlight on faith pretty much more than any other modern-day president. And the way that he has done that, take, for example, this morning when he spoke to all of you. He said, faith and family, not government and bureaucracy. Don't worship the government, worship God. Our national motto is, in God we trust. Reach out to the Creator for great strength. You don't hear those words very often in politics, and you do now more so on mainstream media because of Donald Trump. He has taken the cameras and the White House press and forced them into the Rose Garden, using the White House as a backdrop in order to place issues of faith front and center in the media. For example, the March for Life just happened in January. Tens of thousands of people came to Washington, flooded the streets in a march toward the Supreme Court, and not covered really at all by mainstream media. But it was covered when Donald Trump stood in the Rose Garden and addressed the crowd. For the first time ever, a sitting president addressed the March for Life crowd. And that meant that all of those cameras went to Donald Trump as he talked about the dignity of life. He talked about life and faith and family. And media had to give that coverage. Same thing happened when he repealed the mandate, the HHS mandate for contraception. He brought every media outlet into the Rose Garden and brought up the Little Sisters of the Poor, who had been one of the people who were fighting this lawsuit, and fighting this through a lawsuit, including EWTN. We were also part of that. He pulled them up onto stage so that everybody could see that what these nuns stand for and what they stand for with their faith. He's able to take issues and shine that spotlight, as I said before. If you looked the very next day, wall-to-wall coverage on many of the networks of the Women's March. Same amount of people, same town, same place, and yet the networks made that decision to cover that march and not the March for Life. So despite the fact that the president highlighted it, that was, well, because the president highlighted it, it was just this much of coverage, but there wouldn't have been any, hardly any, had he not done that, had there not been a national presence at that march. I was at the National Prayer Breakfast. 3,000 people got up early, had to be there by 7 a.m. to hear and to praise God and to talk about issues that are important to those who are faithful. I almost choked on my eggs when I heard Donald Trump say the words, Jesus Christ. You just don't hear that. You don't hear it, and Donald Trump has made it not just okay to say Merry Christmas, but he's made it okay to say the word Jesus in public again. the press is really uncomfortable covering religion. They don't know what to do with it. When somebody says the word Jesus, they don't know what to do. They don't know where to go. Many, if you look at the studies, Pew Research has some studies that show journalists are, for the most part, agnostic or not practicing in their religion. They make choices every single day, like the Mom March versus the March for Life. What they don't cover tells us as much about their values as what they do cover. And I think it's important to realize that. Take a look at religious liberty issues. As we have gone through the last year of this administration, religious liberty has been extremely important to this administration. Yet, many in the mainstream media cover those who are standing up for their rights as bigots or yahoos. The cake baker in Colorado who wouldn't make a cake for those people who were going to participate in a gay marriage. They would not make that wedding cake, just as he wouldn't make cakes for other events that he didn't agree with. He was pilloried in many instances in national media.
You know, I think that's an interesting topic. The one thing I want to ask Ralph Howell, who's covered numerous presidents, going back to Abraham Lincoln. But
can you hear this?
But how has President Trump changed the media cycle with the tweets and the social media?
Changed the media cycle?
Yeah.
I haven't a clue. But I can tell you how I can tell you how he's changed the conservative movement in America. He's given us a focus we didn't have before and an energy we haven't had for a long while. And he's forced us to focus on three important things that politicians have run their lives from, people on our side. First is immigration, which is the thorniest. And he's managed to make that a focus that really united the conservative movement as it never was. And it's odd because he sounds awfully mean and cruel at times. And the people who support the wall, for example, don't hate immigrants, don't think all Mexicans are murderers and rapists. There's something else. He gets our frustration with Republican administration after Republican administration that has laughed at us. It's in fact given us the fingers. Yeah, we're with you. We'll control immigration because, yes, well, like you, we believe that Americans have the right to determine who comes to the country, who enters, for how long, and for what reason. But they didn't really mean it.
Grover, you want to weigh in here?
I'll wait.
You wait? Okay, well, I want to change gears and then get Van's assessment now of President Trump's foreign policy agenda.
Well, to begin with, it sure as hell helps to have a foreign policy, doesn't it? And I want to set the stage. Go back and look at when Donald Trump became the president of the United States. When he became president, he inherited the most complex foreign policy and national security situation the United States president had ever faced. He also inherited a readiness crisis. He had an army that you had to go back to pre-World War II times to find an army that was smaller. He even had one time, a year or two before he became president, we actually had more admirals in the Navy than we had ships. He inherited that. And I'm one who has said for some time that today in this environment we live in today is more dangerous than the world was the day after 9/11 because technology is changing so quickly, faster than the ability of our governments to adapt and respond. So as the technologies increase, the threats are increasing exponentially. That's what he inherited. And then, oh, by the way, Kim Jong-un, which I've called the greatest nuclear threat to America since the end of the Cold War. And he inherited a mess because prior presidents kicked the can down the road. We finally have a president who is actually exercising American leadership. I saw last year in the newspaper that the Washington Post was reporting that, Kim Jong-un and the North Korea regime has a miniaturized nuclear warhead capability. That wasn't news. We reported that on Fox News 4 or 5 years ago. That technology came from Dr. A.Q. Khan in Pakistan, and it came through Iran. That just shows you what happens when you do a deal just to get a deal. You get a bad deal for the American people. He inherited that, the missile technology. When I look at the Taepodong missile in North Korea and the Shahab missile in Iran, guess what I see? The same dadgum missile. So he got that. Then he got the South China Sea. The South China Sea and the Hague, the International Court, had ruled basically against China. China thumbed their nose. And by the way, that's when Obama was on his lecture tour trying to lecture the new president of the Philippines, and we wondered why he went back towards China. $5 trillion worth of cargo goes through there every year. It's vital to the free world and to the economy of the free world. And oh, by the way, the Russian bear is back. The Russian bear is trying to reconstitute the old Soviet Union, and we're surprised. We documented several years ago how he was spending $13 billion, Mark, $13 billion, to basically have a new UAV program, a weaponized program. He was going to have a strategic bomber with worldwide reach, and we're surprised what he's doing. When the collapse of the Soviet Union occurred, we were the last superpower really standing. We were standing in his way to reconstitute that old Soviet Union. And make no mistake, Putin is just an old KGB agent masquerading as the president of Russia. There are a lot of thugs out there in the world today, a lot of bad characters. But you know what? We got a president today from Queens, and he's had to deal with a few thugs before. So I think we got the right man in right now. And
well, let me ask you this. Talk to us about how he's virtually destroyed ISIS on the battlefield.
It has. I can't believe this. And that war with radical Islam has been going back for so long. But they're retreating, and we're going to continue. I mean, you're never going to defeat it, but you've got to put the right things in place so that it does not reconstitute itself.
I've got a question for John. John, do the enemy combatants have rights?
Well,
constitutional rights?
They're limited. They are very, very limited rights. I mean, so the Bush administration faced a hostile Supreme Court in terms of the folks that we have down in Gitmo. And what's going on down in Gitmo with the military commissions is itself problematic, just in terms of the fact that this is still going on so many years after 9/11. But you know, they have limited rights.
Okay, Lauren, you want to weigh in at all?
I think when it comes to defense, we've seen him talking more about defense. And look at the budget, the most recent budget, and how much money did he put in there for defense? In addition to $18 billion for a wall, he's increased the Pentagon budget substantially.
And to deal with the readiness crisis, I want to say this. A couple hours ago, you talk about foreign policy and where America is on the world stage today. I got an email, Mark, a couple hours ago. It was from a professor at a university in Sweden. You know what he said? I saw POTUS. I saw POTUS at CPAC. I'm proud for America. America is back. We're showing leadership on the world stage. And like I said, it makes a difference when you got a foreign policy.
Despite the fact that he talked about how he's going bald. Did you see that?
I like that part. I actually tweeted about that part. I like that part.
Ralph, comments? Any thoughts, Ralph? I said, any thoughts about Van's comments on foreign policy? About President Trump's foreign policy?
His foreign policy is being foreign. He's right on China, but he doesn't stick with it. I know he's going to do right on China. He understands that China is the #1 threat to America, economically and every other way. It's a competitor, it's a rival, but it's not a friendly one. It just isn't. The guy that runs China thinks of himself as Mao reborn, and he's trying to embed the Communist Party of China and sells from other countries into corporations to take over the corporations. It's utterly amazing what they're doing. They are so much better at this than we are. Trump is the only guy, in a sense, dumb enough to say, yeah, the Chinese can do this. They really are doing it, and I'm going to do something about it. Now, he hasn't addressed this in total tight focus, but I know he wants to do it. I just have this feeling.
Well, do you think he's consistent in his foreign policy statements?
No, he's not. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. What you have to do is think, what would have happened had we nominated any of the others that we were in love with? I imagine the people in this room were in love at one point or another with the junior senator from Texas. What's his name?
Cruz, Ted Cruz.
Right, you heard Cruz yesterday. He sounded like a politician, right? And with the governor of Wisconsin, who did all kinds of great things, conservative things, and then didn't appear to know anything about anything else. And then finally there was Rand Paul. I guess those are the top three candidates for conservatives. Am I right? Do you all agree with that? I didn't mean to wake you up, sorry. Anyhow, they just didn't have it. I mean, he just blew them away. Because you get the idea that he gets the joke, and he's going to ultimately find.
I think more importantly, his base gets the joke. I want to move on to talk to John about what the impact of Trump on the courts and the rule of law.
Great. Well, in order to really assess the impact that Donald Trump has had on the judiciary and the state of the law, I think, like Van, you need to look back at what things looked like immediately before the election. So during the 8 years of the Obama administration, the federal judiciary had lurched quite a bit to the left. In total, President Obama appointed 329 federal judges, including 2 Supreme Court justices, Elena Kagan and Sonia Sotomayor. There are 13 federal appellate courts in this country, in addition to the Supreme Court. And the reason why they're very important is the Supreme Court decides about 80 cases a year. The federal courts of appeals decide about 50,000 cases a year. So it's often the case that the federal courts of appeals are the last word in terms of deciding important statutory and constitutional cases. When Barack Obama took the oath of office, only 1 out of the 13 federal courts of appeals, the Ninth Circuit, had a majority of Democrat-appointed judges. By the time he left, it was 9 out of 13. By exercising the nuclear option, the Democrats were able to pack the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, often referred to as the second most important court in the land, decides a lot of very important cases to the administration. Some very reliably conservative courts, like the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, became a reliably liberal court. And then there was the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court was and remains very, very closely divided on a whole host of issues that conservatives and liberals care about. The First Amendment, Citizens United case. The Second Amendment, religious liberty, the death penalty, voting rights, racial preferences, just to name a few. Justice Antonin Scalia had died, and we were facing the prospect of either having his replacement being Chief Judge Merrick Garland of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, or if Hillary Clinton had won, somebody who was likely going to be much younger and even more ideological than Judge Garland. Donald Trump did something rather extraordinary. He put out a list of people, most of them were sitting federal and state court judges, and he said that he was going to appoint one of the people on that list to be on the Supreme Court. And the list in general illustrated the kind of people that he was going to appoint to the federal judiciary. This list was an outstanding list, very well thought through. And it resonated not only with conservatives, but with a lot of people who were very, very skeptical about Donald Trump, but who cared a lot about the courts and the future direction of the law. And those people turned out in droves in order to vote for him. The president has promised to appoint men and women of high quality to the federal bench. People who are going to be originalists and textualists, and who are going to issue judgments based on law and not based on their personal or political predilections. And he has come through big time. We now, of course, have Associate Justice Neil Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. And President Trump has spent his time focusing like a laser on filling these critical vacancies on the federal courts of appeals. The Senate has now confirmed 13 federal appellate judges. 12 of them were confirmed during President Trump's first year, which is the highest number of appellate confirmations during the first year of any president ever. Just very briefly,
sure.
The Democrats are doing everything they can to try to stop that train or slow down that train. And
how much credit does Mitch McConnell get for this?
I'm sorry?
How much credit does this
a lot.
Get?
So one, Mitch McConnell and the Senate Judiciary Committee said at a time in which nobody was really predicting Donald Trump was going to win, that the Supreme Court was going to be on the ballot, and that the next president should have the ability to appoint the Scalia vacancy, since that person was likely to serve for 25, 30 years, long past President Obama had left office. So he deserves a lot of credit for this.
Ralph.
And he has pushed these vacancies.
Yeah, this may be the best part of his first year record.
No, I think that's true.
But I'm curious.
Go ahead.
Who did this? I mean, somebody gave the president a list, and he went along
John,
with
that
the
was
list.
you,
You're
wasn't
not-
it?
Well, and nobody here believes that the president.
Heritage.
Well,
oh
no,
yeah.
Well, hold on.
No.
So the answer to that is look, Don McGahn deserves a lot of credit for this. The White House counsel. Don McGahn was on the Federal Election Commission. He's been involved in conservative legal circles for a very, very long time. He came from the Jones Day law firm that has, Mike Carbon, Noel Francisco, the Solicitor General, Greg Taxis, who became Deputy White House counsel, who's now on the D.C. Circuit. He has long-standing connections to an organization that is near and dear to my heart, the Federalist Society, and also I've got contacts, and we submitted our own list. I'm proud to say that of the 8 names that were on my list, 7 of them are on the Trump list. And just one other thing, this is critically important. It's not only going to be his lasting legacy, but if you want to know how important it is, just look at all of the trouble that the activist judges that are now on the court are posing to the Trump administration.
Cherry picking courts.
Yeah, DACA, sanctuary cities, the travel ban, transgendered individuals in the military, environmental policies, labor policies, there are going to be challenges to the tax cuts. All of these are being settled in court and getting the right judges on the bench.
Let's let Lauren jump in here just for a second, please.
The one thing you have to look back and remember is that this was a big campaign promise of Donald Trump's.
Yep.
And it's the very first thing he could check off and say, see, I did what I was going to say. But what I was going to say was that the Catholic vote was not in his hands at the time of the election, early on. You had pro-life groups who wrote a letter saying, we cannot support this president, particularly after the tape came out of him talking lewd comments about women. So for him to laser in on that judge at that time brought the entirety of the Catholic vote, most of the Catholic vote, to him.
That's right.
Grover, how important are these judgeships and appointments to movement conservatives?
Well, they're very important because they deal with all of the economic issues as well. I mean, but the question you asked, what role did Mitch McConnell play? And I would argue that talking about Trump's first year misses most of what's going on. Everyone's seen this map. This map looked like this before Trump was elected president. There are 26 red states. The majority of Americans live in a state where the governor's a Republican, the House and the Senate are Republican, and there are many fewer Americans who live in blue states where it's completely Democrat-controlled. The yellow states, 7 states there, have both houses Republican. So the red and the yellow states are going to be Republican states. Every once in a while you make a mistake and you don't get the governorship, but as soon as Louisiana can nominate somebody with fewer girlfriends, you don't have to have none, it's Louisiana, but fewer, it'll be back to being a red state. And the green and blue states here tend to be Democratic. So over the last several decades, we have turned the Republican Party largely into a Reagan Republican Party and made it a dominant party across the country. I mean, West Virginia's red there. It was blue 5 years ago. Arkansas is red. It was blue 5 years ago. I don't mean it was in transition. It was the other team. And then you look at the House and the Senate. The reason why we had an opening at SCOTUS is because you had one Mitch McConnell and Grassley, who the other team was prepared to spend millions to crush in Iowa if he didn't bend to their will. And you had all of the R's agree to not go along with him. And you had to hold everybody. You had to hold everybody, not just the leadership. So we have developed and built, and the modern conservative movement has supported as an exoskeleton, because not everybody has the endoskeleton backbone that you'd like. So we have an exoskeleton for the ones who are missing the backbone that keeps the party moving in largely the right direction. Now, Trump did something that a number of people forgot to do. He won the presidency. I actually spoke to Romney and told him to do that, and he forgot. But this criticism of Trump, he won, okay? He has the veto pen. He nominates judges. He nominates the folks. The quality, you talk about economics, the quality of people he put at the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, the Federal Communications Commission. The FCC, which I could never get the Bush administration to focus on, only manages 16% of the economy. You think healthcare is big? Okay, healthcare is about 16% of the economy. The FCC is a handful of people who decide what happens in another 16% of the economy. And Trump's appointments were spot on, and the deregulation we're talking about is largely because person after person, and he's put into these, the Labor Board, National Labor Relations Board, all of these folks have been really, really good in those appointments. The judges, as people point out, have been extremely strong as well. And he has a House and Senate that are largely moving in the same direction, so that when he decided, yes, he not only said let's cut taxes, but he was the one who said let's take the business tax to 15, down from 35.
We're going to get into the economy. Let me just ask John to close this out, and I would like to ask you, realistically, how many more Supreme Court justices do you think we might be able to get during his first term?
That's hard to say. Look, I thought Anthony Kennedy was going to hang up his spurs last term. I think he's decided he likes being king of the world better than playing shuffleboard. You do have, Anthony Kennedy, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Stephen Breyer. They're now, I think Stephen Breyer might be 79, but they're all over 80. They've outlived the average lifespan of men and women in this country. I'm not saying I wish any of them any ill health, but anything can happen. And there are a lot of vacancies now on the lower federal courts. So this is not a time for the Senate to take their foot off the gas. And the Democrats are doing everything they can to stall not only the judicial nominations, but of course these fine executive branch nominations.
Lauren, go ahead.
I have to say that all of this is great, but it doesn't amount to a hill of beans unless the media cover it. And I think that you have to take a look at that in changing dynamics for the 2018 race. Because if the media are not on your side and talking about these federal judgeships and talking about what he's done for the pro-life community and talking about what he's done for the government, this is exactly what the president is railing against, then people don't hear it. They come here and hear it, but we're talking in a to each other.
Yeah.
Do you really think that the media are going to change?
No, I got to be honest with you on that. I think that the base gets what he's doing. I don't think you're going to change the culture of the media in this town anytime soon to promote Donald Trump's agenda.
No, absolutely not.
Right, but he didn't need that to win. I mean, he couldn't possibly have won the nomination, yet he did. He couldn't possibly have won the general election, yet he did. In February of last year, when he was about to take office, a Gallup poll showed that I think an astonishing 44 out of 50 states had more conservatives than liberals. So everything seems to be right for a victory in 2018 and in 2020 and so on. The media seem to be utterly immaterial. The people I talk with who work with their hands, nothing is going to change their view of Trump. He's their man.
And they're not watching the CBS nightly news.
No.
Yeah, right. Listen, I want to go to the economy, though, Grover, so I want to give you plenty of time for that. So give us the download on the economy.
Well, and I think the economy speaks to exactly this issue, because reality can trump the media's narrative on economic issues, because they do touch everybody. You could get it wrong in how we handle some foreign policy issue, but nobody feels that in the United States until it's too late. So, but the economy, people feel and they see. When we got the tax bill passed, you may remember the polls showed it was unpopular. People didn't want a tax cut because CNN and the establishment press had told everyone that it would raise taxes on middle-income Americans, and the only beneficiaries would be 1%ers and major corporations, and you weren't going to get a tax cut. Your taxes were going to go up, and there were all these people panicking that whatever SALT was, state and local taxes, that losing that was going to raise everybody's taxes. And Trump's numbers were as low as they'd ever gotten. The generic Republican versus Democrats was in one case 18 points to the Democrats' advantage, another 15, another 12. The bill passes. And all of a sudden, AT&T announces we're going to give 200,000 people a $1,000 bonus. We're going to put $1 billion extra into investments. And we started keeping track of that at our website, atr.org. Today, there are now 400 companies listed that are doing benefits or pay increases or bonuses, and 4 million people now who've gotten bonuses as a result of this, as well as other things, but 4 million that did bonuses. That spread around the country. Yes, the press had to cover that a little bit, but I've heard people say, I was on a plane and I heard the 2 stewardesses, because the airlines all did this, 2 stewardesses talking about how you're going to spend your $1,000 bonus. Those are hundreds of thousands of conversations going on across the country. And then we get ahead to February, when 90% of Americans' paychecks reflected the lower taxes that actually were put into place. And so CNN can tell you anything they want, but if you look at your pay stub, you see you have more money there because your taxes are lower, and a tax cut is a pay increase. A tax cut is a pay increase. People say, well, when are we going to see pay increases? Well, February. 90% of Americans saw it. About 5% is pretty much unchanged, and 5% slightly higher, more high-income people in the last zone. But 90%, twice a month now, are getting a paycheck that says, remember, your taxes are lower. The Republicans all voted for it. We had some help from Nancy Pelosi. Sometimes the press helps us because they think the other team's winning, so they put Nancy Pelosi out to say it's Armageddon, which is something that takes place in 2 Corinthians. And then
which is very helpful as much as she's out there.
Yeah, and it's crumbs, right? So they promote her and her statements, which were interesting, but as soon as reality caught up, they became a liability instead of a clever comment. And half of Americans, not 1%, but half of American households are in the stock market, 401ks, individual retirement accounts, defined contribution pensions. And those people can either go online or wait till the thing comes every month to tell you how much your life savings have increased in the last month, in the last year, and it's about 33%, about a third increase in the life savings of half of Americans that have money in the stock market. Very impressive, awfully hard for anyone to argue with that. We are going to see the stock market continue to move upward. We're going to see more progress on that. We will start to see the increase in pay that flows from the fact that because we have lower marginal tax rates, remember we were 35, which made us the stupidest in the world, and then it brought us down to 21. Communist, socialist China is at 25, right? Socialists are at 25. We're at 35. Something's wrong with this picture. We move it down to 21. Capital is flowing into the United States as a result, not just the $2 trillion overseas that was American-earned money, profits, coming back, but people in Brazil deciding where to put money. All of a sudden, it's less expensive to invest in the United States because we have immediate expensing rather than long depreciation, and more profitable because we have lower taxes.
Are we to infer that the Pelosi's on your payroll at ATR? Is that?
Yes, we tricked her into saying
she's a mole. But let me just ask you, I want to talk about regulatory reform. Isn't that a tax cut, Lauren? Really? Regulatory reform? Going back to regulations, isn't it essentially a tax cut?
I think I'm going to punt and send that right over to you.
Well, look, there's no question. I mean, this has been the most successful deregulatory president that, certainly in my lifetime. I mean, not only has he insisted that
that's what actually started the stock market, didn't it?
Well, absolutely. I mean, not only has he insisted that regulatory agencies cut 2 regulations for every one that they impose, and it has to be, even in terms of the dollar impact. But there's this somewhat obscure act called the Congressional Review Act that gives Congress an opportunity to review a regulatory matter that has passed and to reject it. And not only do they have the opportunity to reject it if they want to, but then the regulatory agency cannot pass a similar regulation without an act of Congress allowing them to do so. This obscure act was passed during the Clinton administration and had been used once by President Bush over the course of its history. In the first year of the Trump administration, 14 times the Congressional Review Act was used to repeal permanently major regulations. That is a powerful.
Van, do these long-term deficits bother you? Are they a national security issue? Use the mic.
I would say this. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, economics is a national security issue, just like energy is a national security issue. The president talked about this today, but I think when we're talking about what the socialists are doing and everybody else, I think Winston Churchill said it best. There are only two places where socialism will ever work. Yeah. In heaven where it is not needed, and in hell where it's already in practice.
$1 trillion deficits bother you, Grover?
Spending bothers me. We should never, we used to say we were against spending back in the 50s, and then we decided that spending was popular, so we said we were against deficit spending because it was an intensifier, meaning bad spending, and because we thought the Methodists would be against spending if you said deficits. And the challenge was that the left eventually said, oh yeah, we're against deficits too. They dropped the word spending. So spending is the cost of government. Deficits are vaguely interesting, but it's the difference between what the government steals and what it wastes.
Well,
that's not the important number.
There's a lot of talk about the infrastructure program that he wants to promote. But there's also talk, Grover, Ralph, and I'd like you to address this, Ralph, about a gas tax. Is that smart economic policy to raise the gas tax?
Two things. Not happening, just so everybody knows. It is not in the president's plan. The president had a written down plan. It did not include a gas tax. In some conversation, a Democrat claims, well, we're looking at everything. We could think about that. He should stop being so polite at these meetings and agreeing that somebody might have an idea there. The House is never doing this. The Senate is never doing this. The entire Republican campaign in California is running an initiative this year to repeal the Democrats' gas tax. Our congressmen are running on that. Our statewide offices are running on it. The state legislators are running on it. You cannot go in and decide to run a national federal gas tax and upend a tenth of the countries of the Republicans in the country on that. So
what about tariffs on imported steel, which has been talked about?
Tariffs?
Yeah.
Free trade.
Yeah.
Free trade.
Well, that's a challenge because tariffs are taxes on American consumers. Tariffs are not taxes on Chinese people. Chinese people do not pay American taxes. If the Chinese put tariffs up against us, their people pay them. It's sometimes counterintuitive for people, but tariffs are very destructive to the consumers of the country that imposes the tariffs. The president has made it clear he wants free and open trade. He doesn't like countries that give themselves benefits and protection and don't let us trade with them. The challenge is, what leverage do you use? Do you shoot yourself in the foot? Hey, I'm going to shoot myself in the foot if you don't stop shooting yourself in the foot, which is a tough way to do it. That's a trade war.
Let Ralph jump in here.
With all due respect, Grover, that's a pre-Trumpian Catholic or religious view of how the world works and how money flows. Yeah, when you impose a tariff on someone else's imports, they cost more, so people buy less of them. That's why you impose a tariff. And so it's not just that the Americans pay more, they buy less, and the country that is trying to export to us suffers. So it's not quite that simple. Nothing, it turns out, in classic conservative economics is quite that simple. And I guess in a way you could argue that Trump's biggest contribution is to make conservatives rethink all of the
trade deals,
religious precepts of conservative economics.
John, you want to talk about it a little bit?
Well, I'm on Grover's team on that one. It's a complicated issue when you end up having countries that are raising tariffs in order to be protectionist. But if you end up having a race to the bottom by
well, I mean, we've got NAFTA. We're renegotiating NAFTA right now.
I'm sorry?
We're renegotiating NAFTA right now as we speak, aren't we?
Well, the president talked about that today when he addressed CPAC and talked about how bad NAFTA is for the country. And I think as complicated as economic policy is, when the president comes up and says, we got a bad deal with NAFTA, people are going to pay attention.
Bubba gets that. his base gets that. But does that make us vulnerable to a trade war?
No, there are too many states that grow crops and for whom NAFTA is a lifesaver for the Senate or the House to ever consider submarining NAFTA. Can we make changes in it? Yes. Are you going to blow it up? Not and get reelected to anything.
That's not why we're not facing a trade war. This is not the era when a trade war, some say, led to the Great Depression. We're too big for that to happen this time. That's just not going to happen.
It's not going to happen. Okay, let me just ask you, Grover, do you think we get to 3% growth this year, GDP? Full year?
I think it's likely if we make it clear that we are likely to hold the House and the Senate, and it's looking a lot better than 2 months ago. I think if we keep moving forward, we will hold the House, we will hold the Senate. But people are going to invest and be happy about the prospects for the country as long as there's a Republican House and Senate that protects the tax cuts. Remember, the president was saying today we need more Republicans and we need to protect the tax cuts. No fight is ever permanently won. You've got to go back and win this again over 2 years. If we hold the House and the Senate, and I believe we will.
Which is looking better now. Generic ballots looking better.
Looking infinitely better since it was looking not at all likely 2 months ago. Until we got the tax cut and people saw the benefits and there is more visible benefit to come since. If you do that, and that's when people worry about deficit spending or spending, as one ought to worry about total spending, reforming entitlements.
But let me ask you this.
Is next year's project.
Are Republicans doing a good job promoting a pro-growth agenda the way we did it in the 80s with Kemp and Reagan?
Promoting
Pro-growth
what?
Pro-growth agenda. Well, his accomplishments. Who's carrying the water in the House and Senate for President Trump?
President Trump's carrying it on Twitter. That's what's happening. You know, the mouthpiece is now of the Republican Party is Trump, period. The end, full stop.
Yes, if you accept that, then the question is
Mike,
pro-growth policies? And the answer is
Yeah, if you accept that, then the question really is Trump, not whether the Republicans are, but whether Trump is promoting pro-growth policies. And the answer seems to me is incontrovertibly yes.
He said, you know, he talks about it every single time he talks. He talks about how great the economy is right now. And he says, everybody open up your 401ks. Look at that 33% increase in 1 year since the day after I was elected.
Nobody has ever done it better than he.
Before we close out the economy, should we make the tax cuts permanent for individuals?
Yes. Yeah, and look, and the position of the Republicans in the House and Senate is that every 2 years they're going to kick it out another 10 years so that we don't end up as Bush did. Remember, we got to 86, and we didn't kick it out another 10 years because we thought we were going to hold the House and Senate forever or something, and then you lost it after the 86 election, and they all ended at the end of 10. We're not going to get within 10 years of the temporary tax cuts remaining temporary. They are wisely going to keep kicking them out, and when we have the votes to make it permanent, we'll do that.
I'd like Ralph, as we close this out in the last 10 minutes or so, just to give us an overall assessment of the Trump presidency, the Trump first year, and compare it to Ronald Reagan's first year.
Trump is so different from Ronald Reagan in that Ronald Reagan came to the office as a philosophical conservative. He'd stand up in front of the news media at a press briefing and put his hands like this and show you how the rates of growth, how they're affected by other. I mean, he understood economics in a very basic way, but he was able to explain it to people. And that's not who Trump is. Trump is somebody else. He's a successful businessman. Reagan was never a successful businessman. He was actually penurious. I mean, the ranch, that famous ranch, is a real ramshackle place that somebody bought for him. Trump is a marvelously successful businessman. He is not, however, a marvelously successful manager. He never had to manage a corporation. What he was able to do is manage his own family business. There's a difference. So the apparent failings, and I think there's some real failings, in this administration are from the absence of that experience, that ability. Otherwise, this has been an extraordinarily successful first year for an American president. and especially for conservatives. I don't remember a time when a Republican president talked about conservative issues with such ease and such firmness and such political incorrectness. He really, I've never seen, get it, right? Never seen that. Are you
Sometimes.
Occasionally
wake up and read it.
Looking at Reagan and Trump, the first year of each presidency, one common denominator. They both inherited a military that had been decimated.
And they both inherited a mess.
A mess. And you know what, though? They both understood one thing. Why do we have a federal government? Why did the states come together in the first place? To provide for the common defense of the American
people.
Well,
if there's a weakness in President Trump's presidency, is it personnel appointments, Van?
Well, President Reagan said it best, personnel is policy. I wrote a piece for Fox a year before President Trump became president saying, put the right people in there, they'll effectuate your policy. I'll be honest with you, still got way too many Obama holdovers holding out in the bowels of the bureaucracy right now. And I'm tired of seeing people who are in some of these positions with little signs on LinkedIn, I'm with her, get them out of there.
I'm going to go down the line, starting with Lauren. Final thoughts, and we'll then close this out with Ralph.
I think on social and cultural issues, we have seen such a change in the way that conservative values are communicated at the highest level. I covered the Obama administration, and it's night and day. It is really absolutely night and day in the way that this president talks about pro-life, talks about religious liberty, talks about all of the issues of conscience rights. People who don't want to do things don't have to do things that affect their religion.
Van, final thoughts.
It feels good to be American again. America is leading again. It's a dangerous world, but we've got to, rather than always respond to the last threat, the last attack, the last national security interest, we've got to think outside the box and prevent the next one. My big concern right now, and I've been in the Trump administration, I think is on top of this, cyber warfare, and it dominates foreign policy. They hack into our stuff, they steal our stuff. North Korea has a quantum encryption device. Bottom line, whoever in quantum computing, if you've ever heard that phrase, is millions of times faster than computing as we know today. China's outspending us 30-1. Whoever wins the quantum race will win the cyber war. Whoever wins the cyber war will dominate the next military operation.
John, final thoughts.
Well, Van said the personnel policy, and I absolutely agree with that. And the Democrats have done a very, very good job of keeping the president's political appointees out of office. The Democrats are taking advantage of every procedural trick in the book. During the Obama administration, I realize this is a technical Senate procedure, there were 10 cloture votes on nominees, which forces delay and forces hours of debate afterwards. There have been 72 cloture votes on Trump nominees, each one of which then triggers up to 30 hours of debate. At this pace, it will take all 8 years before the first round of political appointees are in place. The Senate's going to have to do something.
Well, let me ask you this. Should we go to the nuclear option? Why are 60 votes sacrosanct?
Well, they're not
standing on courtesy. And by the way, does anybody here think if Schumer gets in charge, he's not going to 51 votes?
Hold on. We're talking cross purposes. The filibuster still exists with respect to legislation.
Right.
There is no more filibuster with respect to nominees.
Right.
And that's what I am talking about.
But a lot of
there are
Trump's
other
agenda,
procedural rules.
A lot of Trump's agenda is not getting through because we have to get the 60 votes.
Look, the legislative filibuster, there are all kinds of issues, and all you got to do to keep in mind is if you do away with the filibuster with respect to legislation when you have control of both houses of Congress and the presidency, the same thing's going to happen to you when the Democrats have control of both houses. So I'm not saying it's just a controversial issue, but the filibuster is gone with respect to nominees. But the Democrats are taking huge advantage of these rules, and they're going to have to change
Grover,
the rules
final
to get
thoughts?
these people done.
Politics is a team sport. Comparing Reagan and Trump misses the point. Reagan had Tip O'Neill running the House of Representatives. We have Paul Ryan, and we had head of the Senate under Reagan who was a Republican, but a pre-Reagan Republican. We have two Reagan Republicans running the House and Senate, and backed up by a caucus that is largely Reagan Republican as well. If you lose the House or the Senate, Trump is a completely different person, not because he changed, but because he's the target. He's like a goalie, and the other team takes shots on goal. Look at the first 2 years of Clinton, powerful, all sorts of stuff. The next 6 years, he might as well not have been there. First 2 years of Obama, lots of power. The next 6 years, all he did was take shots on goal, and the House, the Senate, and the President together have done amazing things beyond what has or could have been done when you didn't have all three of those. Hold all three, and Trump and the House and Senate, Republican, have done very good, amazing things that have changed the direction of the country and the world, but it can be undone if you lose any one of those three.
Wrap this up, if you would, wrap up the panel. Ralph, wrap it up.
I think the hallmark for the first Trump administration will be globalization. This is the nut that nobody could crack. Pat Buchanan tried. He was wonderful at it, we all thought, but he never got anywhere. Trump is actually doing it and changing the thinking, the religious views, pardon the expression in this case, of that litany of absolutes about globalization, about how unfettered trade is absolutely is an absolute. This is going to change. It's already changed the perception of, let's say, the working class, the non-elites, about what truth is in economics and what a nation ought to be able to do to serve itself and its people. This can't happen under any of the people that we're running. Only Trump could do this, I think, and I think he will.
Great job, panel. Let's have a warm round of applause. Thank you very much, and have a great CPAC.